Mandela, Mandela.
Mandela, please fight for freedom.
Mandela say freedom now.
Mandela say freedom.
Show us now the way to freedom.
Show us now the way to
In the land of Africa.
in the land of Africa.
Holy Tata.
Holy Tata Mandela.
Freedom is in your hands.
Freedom is in your
Show us now the way to freedom.
now the way to
In the land of Africa.
land of Africa.
Holy Tata.
Holy Tata Mandela.
Freedom is in your hands.
Freedom is in your
Show us now the way to freedom.
now the way to
In the land of
Oh, thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen. We'll see you later.
Hello, everybody. Good evening. It is not by mistake that tonight's event is being hosted here at the Mix in Sophiatown. And even telling is the fact that the choir was honoring freedom fighters of South Africa. Sophiatown is a place with an amazing history, the epicenter of politics, jazz, and blues in South Africa. Sophiatown was a legendary black cultural hub that was destroyed under apartheid, rebuilt under the name Triumph, and in 2006 returned to its original name of Sophiatown. Sophiatown is one of the oldest black residential areas in Johannesburg. This venue itself, the Mix, is a community center and a museum dedicated to the memory of the old Sophiatown, which until 1955 was a vibrant, multiracial neighborhood famed for its swinging jazz scene led by young stars of their time, the likes of Miriam Makeba and Hugh Masekela. My name, ladies and gentlemen, is Refilwe Mteche. I am the Democratic Alliance National Spokesperson, and I have been bestowed with the honor of being your program director for this evening. Tonight, we will be having inspiring speeches from various leaders from around the world, which will then be followed by a scrumptious dinner. Let me apologize upfront to all my leaders because I will butcher their surnames and their names. Just a couple of rules for the house. Please keep your mobile phones on silent because I need them on. For all the social media people like myself, tonight's event will be hashtag capital letters LIEC, hashtag capital LIEC. Let's use it and make our event trend. Under some of our chairs, you will find a puzzle piece similar to this. At the back is a marker which you can use. Please write your freedom message. Your message can be very serious or simply humorous. It's up to you, really. But a message is what we need of you. Let me ask everybody, next to the DJ who's on my right is also the participants list. Please ensure that you have filled that in. At this juncture, ladies and gentlemen, I would like to welcome Mr. Joel Minovus, who is the president of Liberal International, and invite him to deliver the opening address for the evening. Thank you very much.
This morning, when I opened the Executive Committee of Liberal International, I had a few personal words about South Africa, about me as a 20-something-year-old meeting Nelson Mandela and having a chat with him and how wonderful that was and what a memory I have, a memory that marked my life forever. But I chose to talk a little bit about South Africa in personal terms because South Africa for me is personal. You see, I grew up in a small country, up in the mountains, and where freedom was taken for granted. In the 1970s, when I was growing up as a child, I didn't realize that nobody in the world had this, wonderful space like I had of freedom in my mountains of the Pyrenees. And I was 12 already in the 80s when at school they made us listen to the famous speech by Martin Luther King in 1963 on the March on Washington, I Have a Dream, which made a big impression on me. And it was at that time that I learned about the horror of apartheid in South Africa. And it was with great shame that I carried that knowledge throughout my teen years, knowing that far away, but not so far, in South Africa, there was a system that was so horrible, that kept people apart depending on their race. South Africa has marked every single moment of my professional career. From my arrival at the UN, the meeting with Nelson Mandela, my first speech at the UN to welcome South Africa in the name of the Western European Group. Then in 2001, I became foreign minister. The first international meeting I went to was the Conference on Racism here in Durban, in South Africa. And then later, this visit by Desmond Tutu in my country. So I'm very honored tonight to be here to represent these 115 liberal political parties of the world that are assembled in this room, their representatives, and to represent these ideals of freedom that we carry since 1947, since at Oxford University, a bunch of people, politicians and academics assembled with an idea that the horrors of World War II had to disappear and that we had to prevent the totalitarianism that was coming with the Iron Curtain in the east of Europe. And then we went on to other fights. And the DA, the Democratic Alliance in South Africa, has taken on another fight, the fight against corruption, the fight to actually gain government and make government accountable here in South Africa. And I am very happy that very probably, very soon, given the results, we might see you in the national government in South Africa. So Mmusi, my opening remarks are for you. Good luck. You know, you're a wonderful politician in a wonderful country with a wonderful party. You will have always Liberal International helping you in anything you might need. Thank you very much. Have a good night.
Ladies and gentlemen, I would like to now invite Professor Dr. Karl-Heinz Parker, who is the Deputy Chairperson of the FNF. Thank you very much.
Dear ladies and gentlemen, it is a great honor, dear friends, to be here tonight, and a great pleasure for me as representative of the Friedrich Naumann Foundation for Freedom. And I just want to say a few words at this moment, which is in fact very emotional. You know, I cannot possibly compete with the choir that we heard before, which was an impressive piece of the culture of South Africa. But I can, as I come from Germany, I come with the history of the Friedrich Naumann Foundation. The Friedrich Naumann Foundation for Freedom was founded in the late 1950s. In a late reaction, as all other political foundations in Germany, as a reaction to the horrors of National Socialism, of the Nazi period in Germany, because the politicians in Germany said, never again. We have to have democracy. We have to tell people, to work with people, to build up democracy and freedom in the country, and to stabilize democracy and freedom in the country. That was Germany in the 1950s. And note, we immediately opened an office, a regional office in Africa. It was in Tunisia at the time, in the early 1960s. We have been in Africa for a very long time by now, and Africa is at our heart. We want, as many others do, that this continent will have freedom and democracy and prosperity, and we work for that with you together. And it is a great honor and pleasure, especially in South Africa. Dear Mmusi Maimane, it is absolutely impressive what happened in this country since the end of apartheid in the mid-1990s. this country, the Rainbow Nation, which more than any other country in the world is a huge prism, a huge spectrum, a huge kaleidoscope of different cultures, colors, attitude to life, cultures. This is wonderful, but it is also not so easy to hold such a society together, or bring such a society together. And it's extremely impressive what the Democratic Alliance, with a modest help, a very modest help from our side, and we are proud of that help, that we could add a little bit to push a little bit the rise of the Democratic Alliance in this country, which works for the fight against corruption, an open society, and for prosperity. And I promise you, we will continue to do this, breaking free, as you see here. And my friend from Germany, Marcus, just said, I didn't know that you had funny pictures like this, that you use funny pictures like this. We don't do this in Germany, but we do it here. And it's great fun to do it. And on this occasion, I want to end my talk with a thanks to many of you who work with us. It's a wonderful cooperation. And a particular thanks to our representative here, Jules Martin, who organized, with his team, who organized much of what we can enjoy tonight. Thanks very much, Jules. And we work together and we continue to work together.
Dr. Professor Parker, you're being way too modest. I must tell you the phenomenal work being done by FNF. I am an absolute product of FNF. In 1995, as a young girl who was 18 at university, I discovered South African Liberal Students Association, and that's how my political career started. And for those who do not know, South African Liberal Students Association was standing on the broad shoulders of FNF. And today I'm still here, thanks to the hard work that you're putting together. Ladies and gentlemen, tonight, our keynote address on African freedom speech will be delivered by Foreign Affairs Director of Civic United Front, Tanzania, Mr. Ismail Jussa Ladhu. Mr. Ismail Jussa Ladhu is the Director of Foreign Affairs and International Relations of the Civic United Front, CUF, the main opposition party in Tanzania. He was a member of the House of Representatives for the Sophiatown constituency in Zanzibar since 2010 and was re-elected in 2015 before the controversial nullification of the election results. Previously, he served as a member of parliament of the United Republic of Tanzania. Mr. Ladhu holds a bachelor's degree in law from the University of Hull in the United Kingdom. Ladies and gentlemen, Mr. Ladhu. Thank you very much, sir.
Professor Dr. Karl-Heinz Park, Deputy Chairperson of Friedrich Naumann Foundation, Honorable Yule Minoves, President of Liberal International, Honorable Mmusi Maimane, our host here, Federal Leader of the Democratic Alliance of South Africa, Honorable Hakainde Hichilema, President of the Zambian United Party for National Development, Honorable Stevens Ogalapa, President of African Liberal Network, Mr. Jules Martin, FNF Africa Regional Director, Honorable Anne Minitz, Honorable President of Liberal International, who have hosted us twice actually in Belgium, Honorable Hans van Balen, MEP, and President of of the Alliance, sorry, not Africa. Maybe that's a sign of welcoming you here as well. President of the Alliance of Liberals and Democrats for Europe. Other distinguished guests, fellow liberals. Allow me to start by expressing my deep gratitude and thanks to the Africa Regional Office of the Friedrich Naumann Foundation for Freedom for extending invitation to me to talk about the state of freedom in Africa in this second annual African Freedom Speech and Award ceremony. It is indeed a great pleasure and a big honor for me to be here and share a platform with such distinguished liberal icons from Africa and Europe who will be speaking here today. Some of them have already spoken. Distinguished liberal friends, Africa is a continent with many scars that are marks of its long and bitter struggle for freedom through the course of history. Slavery, colonialism, one-party dictatorships, military coups and rule, and here in South Africa, a long period of apartheid, all survived through suppression of freedom, political, economic, social, and cultural. But Africans, like all human beings, born with human dignity, whose core value is freedom, did not accept the humiliation and suppression of their humanity. They rose to fight and defeat each one of them, albeit with great sacrifice. But it was a sacrifice worth giving, for freedom is a precious value. It was Nelson Mandela who said in a famous quote during the Rivonia trial in 1964, that, and I quote, "I've fought against white domination and I fought against black domination. I've cherished the ideal of a democratic and free society in which all persons will live together in harmony with equal opportunities. It is an ideal which I hope to live for and to see realized. But if needs be, it is an ideal for which I am prepared to die." End of quote. Democratic and free society is what we all strive for. And of course, Africa has made big strides towards realizing that ideal. Slavery was abolished, colonialism came to an end, one-party systems were challenged and removed, and military juntas were forced to pave the way for civilian rule. As we speak today, almost all African countries have embraced multi-party system. And I'm using the word multi-party system as opposed to multi-party democracy. And I'll tell the reason why. But the big question that we ought to ask ourselves is, are we free? Has multi-party system ushered in freedom and democracy? I'm afraid to say that in my humble opinion, the answer is no. I've been asked to confine myself to the good governance aspects of the state of freedom in Africa. Good governance being the theme of this 199th Executive Committee of Liberal International, and I intend to do so. When we look at the state of freedom in Africa in relation to good governance, we find that the continent is still a far cry from what its heroes who fought for independence and freedom with their sweat and blood had wished for. But before I get into that, let me share with you what I see are the basic tenets of good governance. Good governance to me essentially means the rule of law as opposed to the rule by law. We all know what rule by law means, that all these dictators pass oppressive laws and govern by them, and they say that's a rule of law. That's not a rule of law, it's a rule by law. It must comprise of, first and foremost, equality before the law and respect for and upholding of fundamental human rights and freedoms of individuals. Good governance must ensure a country is only governed by a constitutional government elected by citizens in periodic, free, fair, credible, transparent, and peaceful elections. And that such government uphold the Constitution, that it is citizen-based, and that ensures accountability through checks and balances built on the strong foundation of a clear and unambiguous separation of powers between the three main branches of the state: the executive, the legislature, and the judiciary. Equally important in good governance is free and independent media that inform the public and provide citizens with a forum to express themselves and exercise their right to freedom of speech and of information. On the other aspect, good governance should also mean equal opportunities for all the citizens, and that national resources are utilized in a way that guarantees fair and equitable enjoyment of the basic amenities of life, notably the essential public services. To me, these are the basic tenets of good governance, and I should say, by extension, the fulfillment of which I believe amounts to the enjoyment of freedom, or in the words of Thomas Jefferson, the pursuit of happiness. With that in mind, let me now go back to my proposition that Africa is still a far cry from being a continent where freedom is cherished and good governance is observed, and explain myself as to why I paint such a gloomy picture. With the limited time that we have, I will have to confine myself to just a few aspects of good governance. I will start with free, fair, credible, transparent, and peaceful elections. And we don't need to go far to see the state of affairs on the aspect. The region of Eastern, Central, and Southern Africa, where we are, has witnessed the worst forms of disregard for the people's right to elect government of their choice, and hence undermines accountability. For if those at the helm of power have put a mechanism that do not need the consent of those they govern for them to remain in power, why should they care to be accountable to them? We have witnessed how incumbents, be they the rulers or the ruling parties, install electoral commissions that they can manipulate and will never be able to declare them as election losers. In Zanzibar, where I come from, our party, the Civic United Front, have won all the 5 elections since 1995, when multi-party system was reintroduced, but have always been prevented through the misuse of the Electoral Commission from taking over the government. It was most vivid in 2015, when we managed to collect all the results declaration forms from all the counting stations, and therefore had evidence of our victory that we shared with all the election observers, that the chairman of the Zambian Electoral Commission, Jecha Salim Jecha, acting under the instruction of the ruling party CCM, realized that he had no other means but to nullify the entire elections. Neither the Constitution of Zanzibar nor the Elections Act provides the powers for the chairman or the Electoral Commission to nullify elections, and was still their decisions cannot be challenged in any court of law. Other countries in the region that have experienced worse forms of the misuse of electoral commissions to keep the incumbent rulers or ruling parties in power include Uganda, Kenya, Ethiopia, Rwanda, Zambia, Zimbabwe, Mozambique, and DRC. But this is also true of other parts of Africa as well, and has been witnessed in countries like Angola and the Gambia before the intervention of ECOWAS and the international community. The worst part of it is that the story does not end with rigging of the elections and imposing themselves in power. The big men of Africa, as they are referred to nowadays, then resort to persecution of their political opponents, especially those that are seen as resolute and will not be silenced. The leader of opposition in Uganda, Kizza Besigye, has frequently been arrested, detained, and prosecuted on politically motivated charges. The last one being just this month. Diane Rwigara, the leading critic who intended to challenge President Paul Kagame of Rwanda in the last election, was disqualified by the Electoral Commission, and since then has been arrested twice and now faces prosecution for what are also seen as politically motivated charges. Just last week in DRC, 30 opposition members, followers of opposition leader Felix Tshisekedi, were arrested after they attended a political rally. Our own leader in Zanzibar, Seif Sharif Hamad, was threatened to be arrested last year, and only after intervention of some liberal leaders through Liberal International and African Liberal Network, through initiatives mainly done through Emil Kirias, and we are thankful to him that he was saved from arrest. But this did not save him interrogation by the police for 3 hours. Honorable Hakainde Hichilema, President of the UAPND, who will shortly and deservingly be presented with the Africa Freedom Award for 2017 here, spent 4 months in detention on trumped-up charges of treason for standing up against President Edgar Lungu, and the list goes on and on and on. Coupled with election rigging has been the change of the constitution to remove term limits for their presidents. President Yoweri Museveni of Uganda, who, when he came to power in 1986, blasted African leaders for turning themselves live presidents, and even referred to the then Organization of African Unity, OAU, as a club of dictators, has himself changed the constitution to allow himself to remain in power. President Paul Kagame of Rwanda has done the same with the presidential term, where the presidential term is 7 years, and he has just gone for his third term. In Burundi, President Pierre Nkurunziza has presided over worst form of brutality and killings of his opponents following his move to contest election for a third term, contrary to the constitution and the Arusha Accord of August 2000 that he signed with the opposition parties. As we speak here now, in Togo, citizens continue with street protests for over a month now that have costed lives of the demonstrators in a move to demand constitutional reform that would see the end of the dynastic rule of President Faure Gnassingbe. Disregard to the constitution also reared its ugly head in Egypt, where the military junta overthrew the elected President Mohamed Morsi. And since then, President Abdel Fattah al-Sisi has led a crackdown against leaders and members of the opposition, the civil society, the media, and even students who have stood up to challenge his rule. Of course, President Morsi himself had committed blunders when he alienated himself from the liberals who backed his candidature during the second round of the presidential election and started undermining the constitution and the judiciary by fielding it with judges loyal to him and his party. Here in South Africa, which has one of the best constitutions in Africa, we have recently heard of incidents where independent institutions, such as the Office of the Public Protector, been threatened after the office investigated corruption charges against President Jacob Zuma. In Kenya, which also boasts of having another democratic constitution in the continent, the recent threats by President Uhuru Kenyatta against the Supreme Court judges following the nullification of the election results declared by the Independent Electoral and Boundaries Commission does not augur well for the independence of the judiciary and the checks and balances provided for in the new constitution. Media has also not been spared in Africa. In Tanzania, over the past 4 months, 4 newspapers have been banned for publishing articles that are critical of President John Magufuli and his government. In South Cameroon, as we all know, a whole section of the citizens in the country are having their right of free speech undermined through crackdown on the use of English in both the media, including social media, in the schools and other public avenues. Political freedom aside, Africa also has a huge problem of economic disparity amongst its people. The Bogen Project has put it that 48.5% of the population in Africa is living on less than 1.25, that is $1.25 per day, and 69.9% on less than $2 per day, which places roughly 637 million Africans out of the total 910 million below the poverty line. The DRC, which is one of the richest countries in Africa in terms of natural resources, is the poorest country in Africa. The average life expectancy at birth for someone born in Sub-Saharan Africa is 46. This tells a lot about a continent that is vast with vast natural resources, that its problem really is good governance. Let me end this part by giving you a good sign of the state of freedom and good governance in Africa. And that is the Mo Ibrahim Foundation has failed to find a suitable candidate for a third consecutive year to receive its Africa Leadership Award, because all the retired presidents of Africa have failed the test put by the Mo Ibrahim Foundation. So, is the story only negative when it comes to the state of freedom in Africa? I'm sure you'll be asking yourself that with what I said, does that mean Africa is doomed and has no future as far as freedom and democracy is concerned? Of course not. Some progress has been made, and I believe it is the responsibility of these countries that have witnessed progress in freedom and democracy to stand up and assist those that are still struggling. As I mentioned, we have models of some of the best democratic constitutions in the world in Africa, with South Africa and Kenya showing the way. Insofar as democratic elections and peaceful transfer of power are concerned, West Africa is progressing well. Ghana, Senegal, Guinea, Nigeria are some of the examples. We hope the Gambia will also follow the path. Despite its democratic deficit, Rwanda has a good example of gender empowerment in politics, with over 50% of its parliamentarians being women. The last decade has witnessed growth of the middle class in many African countries. The advance of science and technology, especially in communication industry, has meant a huge growth of the users of smartphones and other devices, which mean more people in Africa, notably young ones, not only access information, but also use the devices to express themselves. We have seen the emergence of vibrant media in many parts of Africa. They've been exposing mega corruption scandals and thus keeping citizens informed, who in turn have been demanding accountability from their leaders. What is more promising, though, is the fact that Africa has the youngest population in the world. Africa Development Bank has published a finding that says that Africa has the fastest growing and most youthful population in the world, with over 40% under the age of 15 and 20% between the ages of 15 and 24. These young people are the ones challenging the status quo. They are the ones demanding accountability from their leaders and cherish their freedom and democratic rights more than anything else. I believe even the surge in Democratic Alliance performance in the local elections last year was driven by the youth, who wants more than just lessons of history about the liberation struggle. While the liberation struggle is important in teaching us where we come from, it cannot and should not be used by the liberation parties to shield themselves from accountability and respect for good governance. In conclusion, that being the state of freedom in Africa, with serious challenges but also good signs of optimism, I would like to end my address by making the following appeals to my fellow liberals, both in Africa and outside, especially those who have gathered here in Johannesburg for the 199th Executive Committee of the Liberal International. One, I think there's a need for national leaders of the democratic parties, and we've got some here. There's a need for national leaders and democratic parties and movements in Africa to create a continental forum through which we'll be able to share information and also use it as a platform to advance the democratic cause in the continent. I think we see most of the leaders representing the authoritarian regimes, they try to protect each other, and we have no avenue to speak about our ideals and what we can do together. So I think such a forum would help us. We have got some regional ones, but I think we need a continental forum in which we can advance the cause of freedom in Africa. Two, African democratic parties, and especially those from the liberal group that are in government, such as those in Ivory Coast and Senegal, should support their fellow democratic parties that face challenges in their countries. There's no reason why they shouldn't do so when we witness the authoritarian regimes in Africa support each other. And third, liberal friends outside Africa, and especially those in countries with leverage towards African governments, should continue to support the democratic forces in the continent by speaking out in their country's parliaments, in the European Parliament, in other available forums about violation of democratic and human rights, and demand accountability from their governments that support African despotic rulers. I understand it is a tough going for believers in democracy and freedom in Africa. But we have no alternative but to continue the struggle. And as the old saying goes, when the going gets tough, the tough gets going. And I believe in doing so, we are going to break free in Africa as well. Thank you very much.
Mr. Ladhu, if I can ask you not to. Thank you for that incredible speech, Mr. Ladhu. I don't want to comment on the speech. I'm a bit breathless, but I guess the tough must get going. In terms of getting going, I would like to invite two other phenomenal leaders to join me on what I have coined Conversations on the Couch with the theme, The State of Freedom. If I can ask Mr. Hakainde Hichilema the president of the United Party for National Development, our opposition party in Zambia. Please join me, sir. Thank you very much. You're welcome, Nyapila. Please have a seat. And then our third phenomenal leader, Mr. Mmusi Maimane, the leader of the Democratic Alliance, our official opposition party here in South Africa. Please join me, sir. Please have a seat. Thank you very much. Ladies and gentlemen, we've got our phenomenal leaders with us today. And today we're going to speak to them and get better understanding of freedoms and the state of freedoms in Africa today. I would like to start with Mr. Ladhu, who's just given us the beautiful address, just in less than 2 minutes, to tell us about the state of politics in Zambia today.
In Zambia?
Yes. In Tanzania, my apologies. I think I'm very much talking still with Mr. Hichilema today.
I think I was supposed to speak on behalf of Honorable Hichilema.
No problem.
Well,
but let's talk about Tanzania, Mr. Ladhu.
I
Thank
think
you
maybe
very
you
much.
meant Zanzibar, because maybe it's closer to Zambia, where I come from. But well, the situation is really bad actually since the last elections, and maybe I should talk about Tanzania as a whole. But since President John Magufuli came to power in 2015, we have been seeing the shrinking of the political space in Tanzania. And since I've got only 2 minutes, I should just say maybe briefly that he started with banning of political rallies for the opposition parties and went on to ban live coverage of parliamentary proceedings of Tanzanian National Parliament, and then went after the users of social media. A number of young people have been detained and prosecuted for what they post on Facebook, WhatsApp groups, or on Twitter. Didn't end up there. He went on to undermine the newspapers. As I said, 4 newspapers have already been banned, and it seems like that's the path that we're going to take. And that is not enough. Just last 2 months, we witnessed in Tanzania something that has never been witnessed since independence in 1961 in Tanganyika and 1963 in Zanzibar, and since the Union. That a vocal member of opposition, who is the chief whip, Honorable Tundu Lissu, was gunned down just after speaking in parliament, as was being driven home. He was fired with 30 bullets, and he survived just miraculously, to an extent that his party, Chadema, whom we are in alliance with where I come from, had to get him to Nairobi because they didn't believe that in Tanzania would be safe. And I'm glad that actually the last about a week ago, he's been trying to recover well, and he's even giving a speech on his hospital bed to speak to Tanzanians. So the situation is very, very bad. But he didn't just end up there. He's also undermined business community, and even now, the international investors are not spared. So you can see actually that Tanzania has never witnessed a proper democratic system, but even the little gain that we made from 1992 have been lost. So right now, actually, there is really, really a gloomy picture. But let me end by saying that one good thing about it is by doing so, President Magufuli and his party has been alienating himself from the population. Even those who are celebrating the resource nationalism that he was trying to invoke have now come to a point to say actually that he's not really delivering anything for them, and therefore has brought all these forces that have been fighting together, and now there's a great move to try to get CCM out of power comes 2020 when the elections will be held. Thanks.
Thank you very much. Mr. Hichilema, if I can ask the state of politics in Zambia, if you can give us an overview.
Yeah, thank you very much. And first, I'm very pleased to be here tonight. It's important that we exchange experiences, not just in our region, but across Africa, and I guess the world, as a consequence of the exchange of experiences, views. In our country, I think to summarize it really, we have had things going well. From the time that we moved away from the one-party state in 1991, we all believed that this is it, we've done it, we're back to multipartyism now. Went reasonably well, few difficulties here and there. Some would try to change the constitution to get to basically 3 terms beyond the 2-term limitations in 2001. I think the country fought that quite successfully. But since 2011 in our country, we have seen a degradation of the freedom credentials in our country. Very rapid deterioration of what we thought was natural, what we thought was basically a given, that we are free to move as we wish. Today in our country, you have a serious challenge with regards to fundamental human rights, liberties, and freedoms. Freedom of assembly. Very difficult for select members of our community to assemble as provided for in the Constitution and beyond the constitutional provisions as a birthright, as a fundamental universal birthright. Freedoms, movement, freedom of conscience, association. And recently we have seen a tinkering on the freedom of worship, depending on who is worshiping. And the examples are abound. For those in South Africa, I think you are familiar. We have a situation now in our country where, embarrassing situation, where my friend here on my right had to be deported at the airport. Very, very difficult situation for the citizens to accept that the country has degenerated so quickly within a short space of time. So to break it down, because we don't have time, we're losing at a very, very fast rate fundamental human rights, liberties, and freedoms in their entirety. And there's evidential information. We don't have to waste time on that subject. But coupled with this, we have a situation where there's a breakdown in the rule of law. And you know that the rule of law helps you, maintaining the rule of law, helps you to basically enjoy your freedoms. Because if you have no respect for the Constitution, in many cases, again, examples are there, we don't have to debate that. When you have disrespect for fundamental laws, including laws anchored on, if you like, the Bill of Rights, very, very important, Bill of Rights, then you have a serious situation in your country. We have a country where now the criminal justice system takes sections of our population, assumes that sections of our population are guilty until proven innocent. The opposite is supposed to be the correct, that you are innocent until proven guilty. And hence, the extrajudicial killings that have occurred in our country. Very, very sad. Hence, the detentions that we're experiencing in our country now. Since we moved away from the one-party state, we thought we had said goodbye to political prisoners. We are now back to a situation where we have a number of people in police cells, in filthy prisons, as political prisoners. Worse still, Zambia is used to hosting refugees from the north of our country, from this west, not much of the east, but listening to you, maybe the east will become an issue. But of course from the north, by and large. Today, we are exporting not just economic refugees, we're exporting political refugees. This is not something even I ever imagined would happen post-1991 when we returned to one-party state. So as a consequence of these issues, and there are many other issues that I don't really wish to waste time on, briefly, the country is degenerating. Its human rights credentials, its freedoms, basic fundamental freedoms, are being eroded on a daily basis. And I think it's very important that a forum like this understands what is going on in a country. Next door, I'm not talking of a country where you have to fly 6 hours. I'm talking of a country where you fly only 1 hour, 45 minutes. And a lot of South Africans don't know what's going on 1 hour, 45 minutes away from them on a flight, a cheap ticket, if that's all it takes. But in this age of information technology, how is it possible that citizens in the region are unaware of what's going on in a neighboring country? One of the reasons is that there's a gag on the media, very, very serious gag on the media. I think some of you are aware that we've had media houses shut down. As a prelude to what is going on now, it started by shutting down independent media. And the public media, public not in terms of a floated company, but in terms of state or taxpayer owned, where we in the opposition don't exist. If you watch television in Zambia, Zambian National Broadcasting Corporation, there is no UPND, there is no HH, there is no anything. It's as though that we don't exist. Yet you saw the election results in August 2016. Somebody sitting in office above the threshold of 50% plus one is sitting in office on account of 13,022 votes. From a count of one, 13,022 votes. How is it possible that literally 50% of the population is not heard on public media? There's something wrong in the country next door. So I think these forums and others, such forums, are very important to highlight the freedom, human rights credentials, breakdown in the rule of law, now political prisoners and refugees. And the list is long, but all these things are interconnected. And I think it's important that we all understand that we are each other's keeper. That's the brief end point I want to give. We are each other's keeper. We were having a conversation with our colleagues from Liberal International and the Friedrich Naumann Foundation, I think not long from this hour. And one of my comments was that there's this smear campaign going on promoting the color issue, race, and using race as an argument to disadvantage citizens who have happily lived together for many years, who have struggled for freedom together for many years. We should say no to that. And such things should not be allowed to happen in today's world. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I think what a sad state of affairs in Zambia. One wonders what happened there. But Mr. Maimane, listening to the two previous speakers, how different or similar would you say the situation is to South Africa?
Thank you very much, and good evening, everybody. I think there's always an important question to ask, which is, can you have democracy without democrats? Because I think it anchors whether or not South Africa has got enough democrats to continue to fight for the purpose of democracy. Once the impression is created in any society that there's no value in the essence of democracy itself, then one of my fears about democracy in South Africa is that you can have the form of democracy, but really without its power. And it happens in nations like Russia, etc., where at the forefront of it, it looks like the country is holding elections, it's complying with whatever the framework looks like, but behind the scenes, none of those things have material effect. So I think South Africa, on one level, has had the fortune of on the back of a fairly strong liberal constitution, it's empowered citizens, profoundly so. It's empowered them to use their legal rights. And so now we're seeing a lot of court cases between the South African government and citizens themselves. And we celebrate every time we win that. I mean, it'd be unthinkable to think that political parties could take the president to court, the court could rule against the president and actually make a finding. I think that's significant in a democratic state. But it speaks a lot to the independence of the judiciary. We still have a luxury of a diversity of media. I use the term diversity as opposed to all of it being free, because not all our media is free. And we still have the luxury to put our message on the table. We have, at least as things stand now, and I celebrate the fact that in 2016 South Africans went to the polls, expressed their democratic rights, and yes, through a process of tough transition, the opposition can governs in metro areas, and that's a significant development in democracy. So I guess the questions about what is the state of democracy in South Africa, it's always both good and bad. But I do think South Africa faces a crossroad as to where it will go. Whether it will join the ranks of other African states, or whether in fact it will continue to charter the vision that Nelson Mandela had, the idea that we should always stand up for human rights, we should continue leading a leading role in Africa. So if you were to say to me, what then presents the threats to our own democratic state? I think racial populism faces a threat for us, because the surest way to undermine elections is to make sure that people go express their vote on the basis of race rather than any ideas or ideals. That faces a threat. The collapse of institutional democracy, as we've seen and the worst institution to collapse, I think, is Parliament. Because Parliament itself has a job. It is the apex of accountability in South Africa, and once that gets captured, effectively the executive colonizes Parliament and runs its own program. And then ultimately, even the appointment of the judiciary and other arms of the state become compromised. So I think that poses a risk. But I also do think that if South Africa fails the test of providing leadership in the region, I think that in and of itself faces a threat. I think South Africa has failed the test of responsibility. We took quiet diplomacy on Zimbabwe. We've taken a much quieter stance on Zambia. And I do hold the simple principle: you do reap what you sow. And if we turn our eye away from atrocities that are taking place, we are now assisting dictators like Bashir come into the country and leave. That doesn't set us well from our values of human rights and our ability to defend when it matters most. And in 2019, it is going to have to matter most whether we can hold independent elections, whether in fact we won't just fall prey to all the trends in other African countries where we've defended dictators. So I do think we're at a crossroads, but I am, more than my brothers who are here, am much more optimistic about Africa today. I really do think the future of the continent is ours to win. I think that the next decade is Africa's, and I think we've got a profound role to play in the world. And therefore, I really do think we have to make some tough choices. There's no debate about that. But as others would argue, when things fall apart, they do fall into place. So I think we have a profound opportunity now.
Thank you very much, Mr. Maimane. You mentioned Nelson Mandela. I want to acknowledge that today is the birthday of O.R. Tambo, one of our freedom fighters, who it is today that we enjoy some freedoms. And talking about that, I want to take you to an incident that happened in the Tshwane municipality yesterday, where white children experienced racism. And I'm going to start with you, Mr. Maimane, on this particular question, and then I'll ask different questions to the other panelists. How do you see racism and race relations in South Africa?
I mean, it's an involved question, and I want to try and stick to 2 minutes because I can appreciate. The first is that obviously South Africa has a history of racial inequality. That is not only a social question, it's also an economic question. We've got to deal with the systemic processes of racism. And to me, I think that the error we've made in South Africa is the proposition that our miracle in 1994 was a victory of one race over another. If you depart from that point of view, then of course, naturally, you must say South Africa has Dutch colonialism in it. That was succeeded by British colonialism in a very simplistic manner. Then you have Afrikaner nationalism. Now you have African nationalism. The question on the table is what form of nationalism will take over from there. In that paradigm, you must then safe to assume that it must be the turn of another race to enjoy the benefits of the state. It's a function of replacing one racial elite for another. And once you get into that philosophical paradigm, trust me, you undermine democracy and you'll never deal with the issue of racism because you need it. You need that paradigm to support racism. You need racial discrimination to support that worldview. We have to break that. We have to remind the people of South Africa that the battle for a non-racial society is not a contestation of one race over another. It is a function of all races united to deal with the injustice of a race that was left behind. And it requires black, white, Indian, and colored to deal with that issue. I am not in the school of thought that says society must be colorblind. I'm of the school of thought that says, I recognize that we are of different colors, but together we make a beautiful rainbow nation that deals with the injustices of our society. That's the first. And the second is the incident that took place it was totally unacceptable because it spoke to the fact that now you deny people's rights to be who they want to be. And so what took place the other day then simply sought to say to people, look, we reintroduced racism to our children. And I think that's an injustice because racism does not come natural to human beings, as Nelson Mandela said. We ought to teach them that. And I fear yesterday we taught young South Africans another form. So where I stand, that's why in the DA you can have all races together. You can have all religions together. Because what should unite us is our values. And that ultimately we must recognize that we are in a fight against the system that oppresses others. And all of us can contribute to fighting against that system. So that ultimately those who stand, because I agree, racism doesn't just leave itself in economic terms. Football players who earn the same amount of different races can hate each other on the color of their skins. Then we can isolate those incidents and begin to deal with those and say we condemn racism because it is unnatural to human beings. It ought to be taught to human beings. And so I hold the absolute view, the role of the people who are here is absolutely vital. As liberals, it ought to be the fight we are at the forefront of, for we recognize the value of humanity and we identify the rights of individuals. We ought to be at the forefront of that fight. And I'm afraid if I was to say something here in this room, it's something we've shied away from to our own detriment. It's time we pull up our socks and begin to speak up a lot more on this issue.
Thank you very much. Mr. Hichilema, I want to come to you. I actually want to pose two questions to you.
No problem.
Based on the unfortunate or painful experience of you being detained in Zambia, how do you see liberals being denied freedoms? And then how would you see the international community playing a role to advance freedoms in your country?
Yeah, I think my prison experience really ought to be taken from two angles. It's a negative development because my rights were trampled upon. The important thing also is to know that it's not just the rights of Hakainde. I'm out today, but as I said, there are lots of other citizens, some of them as young as 19 years old, who would be sleeping in their house, and the police, make note of this, the police, taxpayer-paid police, together with political party cadres from the ruling party, jointly would hunt down citizens in their homes on account that they are members of the opposition, not just any opposition, UPN. Because you need to understand the politics in our country. We have more than 60 parties, but the competition is only between two parties. I think it's important. 2015 elections, by-election, colleagues in office and ourselves shared 95% of the vote. 2016 in an ordinary election, we shared 98+% out of 60+ political parties. So you need to understand sometimes there's this misconception that why is it UPND members being arrested? It's because the competition is between UPND and those in office. So the point I'm making here is that there is a negative side of the coin that citizens have their rights taken away from them through trumped up charges, brutal arrests, very brutal. I'm not supposed to be alive. I'm supposed to be long. But time was not yet there. The point is that it is wrong from that side of the coin. But the positive side, for many people may not understand, of our experience, those of us who have been arrested brutally, tortured, detained, 1 week, 2 weeks, 1 month, 2 months, 127 days, you learn that nobody, it's a positive side, nobody is actually free of such a situation. It can happen to anybody. Number two, you don't have to commit a crime to be in prison. Then you learn that there must be many other people who are in prison who have not committed a crime. Then you start treating prisoners differently because you have experienced it yourself. You also learn, number three, that positively, I think, that you have prison conditions that are inhuman, completely inhuman. Congestion, disease factor, deaths. People die in those prisons. And people die who are innocent. Even those that are guilty should not die because they're human beings and there's a way that they must be treated even in prison. So those are positive things. And one of the things I tell my colleagues that we have a clear and uncontested actions that we will take when our time in office comes. And that will be soon. We have to deal with some of those issues because we've experienced it. So now, what can the international community do? By the way, your question was that liberals. It's not a liberal matter at that point. It's a human right matter. Detention, inhuman treatment, torture is not for the people in this room because we're liberals. No. It is for every human being, every citizen of the world. And mind you, we are all one family. We're interconnected. So every human being should, and no human being should go through what is happening in a number of our countries. That's a clarification I wanted to make. Now, the international community, liberals, as a natural, if you like, connection, ought to do more for each other. This man here, I think he tested what we go through. And he was supposed to attend my court session. And he ended up basically experiencing what he experienced. So we're thankful to him. We're thankful to the DA. We're thankful. I must say so, Mmusi. Last time I missed this opportunity. I'm thankful to Julius Malema. I'm sorry that this is a DA platform. But I said that it's no longer at that point just liberals. It's no longer just DA, UPND. It is a humanity issue. Because these young brothers of mine, him taking the lead and Julius following, and many other people, I must say, in the ANC. And that's the point I'm making. That it's not a partisan matter at that point. It is beyond that. Who came to our aid in many ways? Ordinary citizens, away from liberals, came to our aid. To the aid of many who are still languishing in prison today, to get them out. So the point I'm making is that we are each other's keeper. I said it earlier. I think we have no choice. We've got to do more. We've got to understand that what is happening in Zimbabwe and the way South Africa, I like what Mmusi said, the way South Africa dealt with the Zimbabwe matter actually encouraged what is going on in Congo, encouraged what is going on in Uganda. Surprise, surprise, maybe not surprise, encouraged what's going on in Zambia. So we can't say that what's going on in Zimbabwe and Zambia is a domestic matter. And he should look at me and say, why am I saying so? Because I was seated in Parliament when he invited me there. And the question was asked about, what are we doing in South Africa about Zambia? Degradation of human rights. You know, confrontation, affront on the rule of law. And the answer was, oh, that is a Zambia internal matter. I hope you remember.
That was there.
That is a Zambia internal matter. And later on, I was interviewed by a radio station, and I said, I think we must never have short memories. Zambia was the headquarters of the ANC anti-apartheid struggle. The man whose birthday we're celebrating today, O.R. Tambo, lived in Zambia for over 26 years, shared our little whatever facilities. I went to undergraduate school, university, with MK members who were masquerading, and don't misunderstand me, who were masquerading as citizens of Zambia, even adopting our names so they could qualify for taxpayer bursaries to sit with me in a lecture room in an econometrics class. So paid for by poor citizens. Today, some of them are ministers here. How can they forget that apartheid was not a domestic South Africa issue? It was a humanity issue. How is it that they can now afford to say the Zambia problems on freedoms, human rights are a Zambia issue? The Zanzibar problems are a Zanzibar issue. I think I've said enough. We are each other's keeper. We don't do anything about what's going on in Zanzibar. The implications of that, including migration and xenophobia in South Africa, is partially driven by the failure to deal with Zimbabwe properly by South Africa and all of us. And then it affects everything. And it becomes a racial issue in terms of black-white. What would you call it? Xenophobia, Zimbabweans against South Africans, South Africans, what do you call it? Is it a racial issue? It's a failure to deal with our collective problems. Thank you.
Thank you very much. You touched on a very important part about xenophobia, but I want to take it to another level and come to Mr. Ladhu. The issues of religion. Could you unpack your take on human rights, liberalism, and religion?
Well, I think it's very difficult, first of all, like to squeeze it in 2 minutes, but I'll try my best because the topic like requires on proper attention. I think as liberals, we all know that we believe in fundamental freedom, and that includes freedom of worship, which to me also means freedom not to worship if you don't want to. So I think that should be the fundamental. Now talking about the relationship, I think it's far bigger, and it's a subject that I've been speaking to not just in Zanzibar, Tanzania, but also outside. And whenever we receive guests from outside, we like to talk about our part of the world. And I'll talk specifically about the challenge that we face in our part of the world, Eastern Africa. Maybe it can also like apply to other parts of the world. I see that, and I'm a Muslim, actually. And I see actually one of the root causes of like radicalization of our young people, and sometimes driving them towards terrorism and being used for that end, has been the injustices that they face in their country. I'm not saying that it is justified for them to do that, but actually injustices, poverty, politics of exclusion, lack of human rights and democracy, all these drive our people actually toward that. So I think it's so important for us liberals, and as Honorable Hichilema said, that maybe not just for liberals, but as humans actually, who believe in the cause of human rights and democracy, to emphasize on that, because I think when we, as to use this term, when we don't become the keepers for each other, then actually it leads to those who don't believe in democracy and human rights to continue to deny them, and this actually sometimes just leads people into like extremism. And as I said, actually, if you look at our part of the world, look, for example, the Zanzibar case. Actually, we are predominantly a Muslim society. It's 98% Muslim population, but it's a country or islands that have witnessed religious tolerance over its course of history. We have many political problems, but we have never experienced religious problems from time immemorial. Minorities, being Christians, Hindus, have always lived together with Muslims, and we celebrate Christmas, Easter holidays, and Diwali together with them as much as they celebrate Eid with us as well. But the past 20 years, because as we keep on saying, the only memory that the young peoples of Zanzibar have about democracy is stolen elections. From 1995, the only thing they remember is that they go to the polls believing that they can bring the change that can, means maybe better lives, employment, more opportunities for them, but that opportunity is denied to them. So sometimes actually, when they see that actually this is also the result of for example, the mainland forces. We are united with Tanganyika in the United Republic of Tanzania. And we keep on saying now, the only relevance that the young people of Zanzibar see about this union is that every 5 years, it sends the army to Zanzibar to impose a puppet regime that will serve the interests of the mainland, not of Zanzibar. So sometimes the young people of Zanzibar mix that as well with also like the other factors, including the region. And that leads to kind of like hatred against people of other faith. So I think it's important and maybe it cannot be overemphasized, that for democracy and freedom to succeed, that's the only way really to continue to keep the tolerance that we have known throughout the course of history. But the more actually we have got a shrinking political space that we keep on denying democratic and human rights, actually, I think we keep on driving people towards intolerance and extremism. And I think that's a great danger, not just actually for Zanzibar, Tanzania, East Africa, but also many parts where freedoms are denied to the citizens. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Mr. Hichilema, I'm going to start with you.
Sure.
The final question for the evening.
Thank you.
Could you tell us how you see the future of liberalism in Zambia?
I think it's bright. The future of our country, despite what we've shared tonight briefly, we strongly believe that Zambia, Zanzibar, strongly believe so. Whatever the challenges, South Africa, whatever the challenges, Congo, we have a bright future because it is in our remit, it is our responsibility to deal with the challenges that we face today. And in Zambia, we have undertaken on a dialogue process that will work towards returning our country into normalcy, to restore the human rights, to restore the rule of law, to solve the problem of political prisoners, detainees, refugees, and to deal with an ugly thing that in our country is not a racial issue, nor religious. It's actually the early beginnings of ethnic cleansing, very clear, where citizens from certain regions are being removed from the public service. It's going on. So, but we have to deal with these issues because we have one country, we are one. We will not allow such divisive elements, driven sometimes under the placard of politics, to divide the country and lose the opportunity to deliver economic and social advancement, to fight poverty. That's really, for some of us, what keeps us going. 127 days in jail is an issue, is not an issue, because we have a program, we have an agenda. So from that belief, we see that there's a future, and if we collaborate more, as we are doing today, using the liberal platform, which fundamentally, if we are sitting here, we are liberals. We believe in freedoms, isn't it? We believe in liberties. We believe in opportunities for everybody, economic, social opportunities, including education. And the debate we were having earlier with colleagues out there was that I think we should re-look at our definition of liberals and liberal democracy. We cannot avoid the social element, because society will always have less than able people. That's how it is. And I think a true liberal understands that they are disadvantaged members of society that need to be taken care of. That's how God created our societies and human beings. So I think the future is good. This sort of sharing of platform I see is very positive, and I think Liberal International being here, the regional Africa Liberal teams being here, it's a good platform for us to basically do better things, to be able to counter the negativities that we are seeing in our countries. That really should have no place in today's world, because we should be focusing on exploiting the resource endowments that our countries have in order to advance our people to better their lives. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Mr. Ladhu, if I can phrase the question differently for you, the future of democracy in Zanzibar, considering the repeated nullification of elections?
It's a tough question. But I think, first of all, I share that despite all that has been happening, I think one thing, for those who know me, you know, like, I've always been an optimist. And that's why I've been like, never giving up. It has been 5 times and we still continue to be there. And I think in each election we've been making progress. The fact that the last election, as I said, we managed to beat the ruling party and the Electoral Commission in a way by getting to collect the results from all the stations with evidence, with the results declaration forms. Actually, one thing that they resorted to nullification was because they didn't know what to do. We finished voting by late afternoon on the 25th of October 2015, and by 2 a.m. of the 26th, we had the results. Of course, now it's small, but it is not that easy, especially when you know that the ruling party is backed by the army, by the police, by the local government administrators, and every one of them, and yet we could do that. And we know from an insider from CCM that up to that time, actually, they had their thing on the PowerPoint waiting for the results, and they hardly 10% of the results collected. That also was true of the Electoral Commission. So I have faith in that, actually. I think that the issue, how we can, finally get to the point that the results will be respected. And one other thing that we're exploring, that I think we in Zanzibar are suffering because we are treated in isolation by the Malian authority. Many of the people are of the view that, and I must maybe say one thing here, that Tanzania as a whole, we face the same problem that South Africa and other parts of Africa are facing, especially those that are still governed by the so-called liberation parties, that they think actually it is their right to continue to govern, whether they've got the consent or not of the people. So many people believe actually that it is only when they get removed out of power then there's a real chance of democracy. Of course, Zambia has shown the way that it can be, and then still you can go back actually to to the old ways. And as Mmusi said, unless you really like fight for these things and you don't take them for granted, there's always a danger of going back to where you were. So we got the same. But now the focus really, after that success in Zanzibar, and even on the mainland, because the system, despite all what it did, it got its worst results in the history, even on the mainland. They got only 58% of the votes. In the past, they used to get 80, 70, 60. This time they got 58. So as opposition, we are gaining. And I think the fact that we formed an alliance in the last election, it helped us a lot, especially with the split of the CCM itself. I see there will be still a further split for CCM, especially given the way Magufuli is running the country, because it's also not only undermining us, but also undermining the very people within his own party who believe differently in the way he believes the country should be governed. So I think with all this, I think when CCM will be challenged nationally, islands in the mainland, then there's a chance for Zanzibar as well to be like liberated. But I think altogether, if that does not happen, I think that one thing that will happen is that the drive for Zanzibaris to demand the independence from mainland will increase, because people now see that the only relevance of this union, as I said, is to send army and impose public regime. They see it as colonization of Zanzibar by Tanganyika. So if nothing will happen, actually, that is going to drive the young people. And the feeling is already there, that the only way to get this is to demand a referendum and to ask the people of Zanzibar whether they want to remain part of the union or not, which will be a retrogress. But actually, I think that can be the case. So I still believe that democracy is the future, because young people, and as I said in my speech, I believe that the young people are the future of this continent. And despite all what happened actually in Zanzibar, you'll be surprised that normally people say, like, what's the point of joining CUF, our party? Because it keeps on winning the election and never get a chance to govern. But yet, more and more young people keeps on leaving CCM and coming to CUF. So I believe actually the future is going to be bright. Yeah. One day it's going to happen.
Thank you very much. Mr. Maimane, to you, I have to ask, the future of democracy in South Africa with the looming ANC elections in December. As your closing remark, briefly, please, Mr. Maimane.
Yeah, sure. Firstly, I don't think the look. Let me put the question to you in this way. There's a lot we can discuss. I can give you the permutations as to what happens in the ANC's conference or not. We have to come to this point and say it's immaterial who leads the ANC. Because just because you get a new leader does not mean you reform your identity. The ANC is a liberation movement who believes, as you were saying, it is their God-given right to govern forever. The issue for us is that we must sit back and say, as I said earlier on this morning, at first we must be liberated, and then we must liberate ourselves from the liberators. We can't sit here today and have some form of reverence of the ANC. And that's a generational question. I know what it's like to have been in the ANC. But many of the time is that they have this hegemonic view as if politics can only be shaped by them. And therefore any permutation must be what is the ANC going to do, and therefore we must determine what happens in the rest of the world. What if we phrase the question differently? What kind of society are we going to have post the ANC? That for me is a much more energetic question, because it speaks to this principal truth. Opposition almost invariably never comes from the ruling party, because if it does, it follows what the Kenyans have learned. It is their turn to eat. So it ought to come from the opposition parties who stand for different values, who approach the matter by saying, when we win elections, the change isn't just from the colors of the ANC, black, green, and gold, to the colors of the DA. It ought to be philosophical, ideological, and say, we will govern differently. Half of the problem in many African states is that many of them, you can remove the ruling politicians, but the administration is littered with cadres that are from that same party. So invariably you see change politically, but you still are stuck with the same cadre of persons sitting in the administration. So when we change, we've got to see the change in every way fundamental. Because the lesson I've seen as well is that we've had other African states that have gone democratic change, but nothing really materially changes for the citizens because those who come in just are replacing one form of racial elite for another. I think the future of South Africa, and of democracy has everything to do with the fact that values that are in this room not only need to be fought for, as Coretta Scott King said, freedom is never won, it ought to be fought for in every generation. They ought to be fought for, but they also ought to be cultivated. The task that must be resolved from meetings such as this one is what is the vision for Africa and who are the Africans we must engage so that they share those values. Because we can't just take them for granted. Because they've seen models of big man politics, and who am I to assume that they are not ambitious to replicate them? We must fight for them, we must hold parties accountable so that ultimately the democratic project can be safeguarded. Otherwise, if we don't fight for it and assume that it's just going to happen by osmosis, we will run the risk that one day we'll wake up and say, yes, we did see change democratically, but still, in fact, the constituents and the processes have remained the same. So my optimism lies in the fact that we have a cause to fight for and a cause to defend. We mustn't sit back and assume that it's going to happen just on its own. We must go out, cultivate it, and make sure more people share our values. Because I've always maintained that the growth of opposition parties doesn't happen. People, when they go express their votes in the ballot box, sometimes go and express their identity. They don't always go out there to express the manifesto because not many people read that stuff. So what we have to do is ensure that the values of freedom, the rule of law, become things that are cultivated in our societies. Because if we fail that task, trust me, we'll see democratic change and no material change. It's just the basic thing.
Ladies and gentlemen, this brings us to the end of Conversations on the Couch. And I'm sure you'll agree they have been wonderful, informative conversations. A round of applause, please, for the three panelists. Thank you very much to my panelists. If I can ask you to take your seats again.
Sure.
Thank you very much. Woo. Thank you very, very much. I'm now going to ask the Soweto Choir to come back and serenade us with some beautiful music. Thank you very much.
gentlemen, this is the song that we sing in our townships, which means touch, touch, and touch, and touch. All right. Please join us as we sing Fata Fata. Yes. Let's go. Everyone at one. A two, a 1, 2, 3, 4, come on. Ladies and gentlemen, good night.
Ladies and gentlemen, I think that gave us a bit of a nice break. We are now moving to the most exciting part of our evening, the awards part. Before calling the participants onto the stage, let me remind you all about the symbol of the honey badger. I want to point to the picture here and maybe bring the trophy through so people can actually see it. I will come back and collect it when we hand out the award. Indeed, it is not necessarily a very pleasant animal, and one might even say it's ugly. Yet, has true leadership qualities. For its size, it's Africa's most fearless animal. It is relentless, tenacious. It has a reputation for performance. Honey badgers catch animals that are bigger than themselves. They are determined to succeed. They have good timing, like the Germans. They focus on their strengths. They are resourceful. They are resilient. They take risks. They create opportunities for others. They network and they collaborate. This is the descriptor by somebody who studies animals of what a honey badger is. As liberals here in Africa, we are true honey badgers. Usually, we are not liked by our enemies. We continuously have to fight to get our principles through. Having described the honey badgers that we are, I would like to invite Mr. Mmusi Maimane to come onto the stage and join me so he can present the African Freedom Award for 2017 in the form of the Ultimate Honey Badger for 2017.
Thank you. You want me to do it now?
Yes, please, my.
I thought I'll just, I've got to present this great award to my great friend, HH, who is here. But I thought it might be worth my while just saying just one or two things about HH. Is that all right?
100%.
And I thought, it's appropriate that we give people the full African experience while they are here. Because it would look like there are too many people in this room who are both cold and hungry. Trust me. It's the experience of a lot of Africans. So I hope you can appreciate that we do our best to give you the full package. But let me thank FNF for being here. Let me thank you so much, Prof, for being here. And let me thank Julie for being here, for members of Parliament, the President of LI, the very respective Hans, and all the colleagues that are here. I promise you I will not speak for long, except I thought there'd be some few things that are absolutely crucial for us to share. Part of my difficulty about having conversations about Africa is that when I've traveled all over the world, I've come to meet many leaders and many prime ministers, and I've always been struck when you speak to European leaders and you say to them, can you talk to me about Africa and South Africa? Many of them's reflections are like, oh yeah, that continent, disease, democracy, dark continent, don't talk about it much. And it's become one of my greatest fears. Julie, you spoke about how you had the privilege of welcoming South Africa to the UN. And I can recall in that period of 94 to 99 how we spoke about Africa and South Africa in glowing terms. And it was nice to be spoken about. And then we got to a point where people were speaking about South Africa or Southern Africa in very negative terms. My greatest worry is that now people are not even talking about Africa. And that's because in many ways I fear that we are starting to answer questions people have stopped asking. We have to, ladies and gentlemen, chart our youth way forward. We have to talk about the prosperity of this continent. We have to answer the simple questions about what we do with a bulging population and how do we respond to that economically. How do we deal with the inequality that besets this continent? How do we ensure that when we anchor a vision, one of the things that I'm fighting hard for is that Africa must create something a bit similar to what ASEAN looks like. A notion where we can create economic trading blocks so that we can respond to some of the complexities that are here. How is it that Nigerians are drinking wine from France instead of from South Africa? We all know the best wine is from here. So how do we enhance trade within that space? How do we ensure that we build democratic institutions that build capable states that can respond to the complexities that we face? How do we bridge the divides between race, ethnicity, culture, gender in our society to ensure that human beings will stand as rights of individuals? You see, our values are important, but our vision equally must be so. That's why I took to heart in what you said, that we must stand united in the continent. Because as things stand now, we've got a brotherhood called the African Union who seems to gang up together and protect big men. And I've worked hard to coordinate opposition leaders in Southern Africa to ensure that we can respond within that complexity. It's for that reason I went to Zambia, not only because HH is my friend and I thought it's unfair that he's in prison. I better go join him there. But it's because it becomes important that solidarity in Africa amongst African leaders is something that we give substance and material to. Ladies and gentlemen, these gatherings they have to articulate a way that attracts a future generation of leaders. And it's within that context that I think it's right and appropriate that we give an award such as this one to someone like HH, someone I deeply admire, and I really cannot think of a more deserving candidate. You've heard his story about his time in prison, but you've equally heard his story in the sense that he's brought efforts to bringing freedom and an open society to Zambia. I have come to know him as an individual with strong character, but with a vision for Zambia. And that's what's drawn me and has built a friendship between us. It's not in what we oppose, but it's in the picture we see for both Zambia and South Africa. That in fact he believes more than anything that when we break down big man politics and we end up in government, we have to ensure that we open our markets for better trade, that in fact it is in the private sector that jobs are created, that in fact he himself as an established and a renowned businessman, that he can open up more opportunities for more Zambians to be able to do likewise. That human rights cannot just be things that live on documents, on constitutions, but that they get given expression to the daily lived experiences of the people who elect us to serve. And therefore, you can't help but feel that the injustice that is taking place in Zambia is something that will affect all of us. Because an attack against a leader in Zambia is an attack against all of us in the continent. And that's why it's important that we not only craft up ways to draft strategy as to how we respond economically, so that as part of a movement of leaders, we offer Africans a hope beyond post-liberation movements. So to my friend HH, congratulations.
What an honor.
You get a honey badger for coming out of jail.
Thank you. Please take your seats. Why should you say so many kind things about me? But I'm grateful. I'm actually completely humbled for the words that you've used. But let me stick to my order, the order in which I wanted to say a few words. First is to really appreciate the presence of the President of Liberal International. Thank you for being here, and thank you for the things you said, very briefly, but quite succinct. Thank you to the Deputy Chair of Friedrich Naumann Foundation. Thank you to the organizers, to the hosts, TA. Shall I just say thank you to the ladies and gentlemen that are here. I know my colleague, my Vice President, you may stand up so people can see you in our party, UPND. He's here, Dr. Mwamba, Dr. Geoffrey Mwamba. Thank you. We are humbled to be invited to this function, this very important function, extremely humbled. And I take it as my singular responsibility to thank the Friedrich Naumann Foundation for recognizing in a small way our efforts, small efforts, not in your small way, in our small way, the efforts, our fight for freedom in Zambia, in the region, and Africa as a whole. And I said earlier on that human rights are universal, freedoms are universal. So I think I mean just that. We want to thank you for this wonderful award, African Freedom Award 2017. Thank you very much for it. And I had started talking about Mmusi for the good words he has said, but I must say that Mmusi and I hit it out quite quickly after a few interactions. And he leads a very big party here, but I see him as a young brother as well. And I think Mmusi forms part of, in my view, and I think the views of many, that Africa is now ripe for a generational change in leadership. People who come with a different background. And I think Mmusi represents that, and many others that we're meeting when we go somewhere and sneak out somewhere around the world. We meet a lot of great people out there. And I think it's important that we network these people. And a platform like yours really, really is very helpful. And listening to my colleague from Zanzibar today, I was chatting with my colleague from Botswana, my next door neighbor. There's a lot ahead of you, my colleague, because things are not run well in our countries, in our continent, on our continent. We can run our countries better, there's no doubt about it. But thank you to your party as well, Mmusi. I know without their support, you wouldn't do what you have been doing. You wouldn't give us the support that you have been giving us. And I understand that, leading our own party at home. Without the support of your party, it's very difficult, even if you may have personal beliefs, to do certain things. So thank you to the DA at large. Thank you so much. Where is my friend? Please stand up. He managed to come to attend one of my court sessions. Thank you. Thank you very much. He survived the deportation. You wanted him deported as well? Thank you. Thank you. We dedicate this award to all of you that have been struggling in a very, very hostile environment in Africa. We did well in the 90s as a continent, moving from one-party states, dictatorships, into democracies. Now the graph is going down. We have a lot of work to do. We have a lot of work to do to protect the vulnerable. And that work does not require anything to do with persuasion. If it was done out of persuasion, I think we wouldn't do what we do. We do what we do because we believe that those that came before us sacrificed for us to be free. And I'm not being derogatory here. For you whose color of your skin, it's not an issue, but it's like mine. If those who fought for slavery to end did not sacrifice, you and I will still be in the marketplace being traded as commodities today. So we don't have a choice in our struggle for freedom, for rights, rule of law. We don't have a choice. It is a responsibility, a generational responsibility that is inescapable. I don't want to talk for long. You have listened to us tonight. And thank you to this Director of Ceremonies, moderator, lady, capable lady. I want to thank everybody who has been here today, tonight. I also want to encourage you to do what is right for your communities, to do the things that will help the citizens of Africa to get the leadership that they deserve. Because it's that leadership that will advance our communities economically, socially, and allow us to deal with poverty in a strong and effective manner. It is those efforts that you are making that should not be based on remuneration. I don't do what I do in Zambia because I seek remuneration, no. Because if you did that, then it may well be that a corrupt leadership, which is a brutal dictatorship, may put a bit of money on the table, and you may just be tempted to take it and lose sight of your responsibility to fight for freedom, to benefit the community in which we live. Africa is too rich for its populations to be poor. I'm a great believer in that. It's too rich. You have a paradigm, an inherent contradiction. A rich continent in all respects on one hand, and too many poor people on another. The missing link here is a good quality leadership anchored on what we liberals believe in. We believe in things that must be available to us. We must also believe that others need to enjoy the same things that we want to enjoy, including freedoms, liberties, opportunities for support, education. I think I choose to end here and to say fear should not be allowed in our lives. Because I see in my own country there's too much fear. Citizens are afraid. They can't even say a word. I'm telling you. But if we get ruled by fear, then we have no struggle we can engage in. Absolutely. We need the confidence, we need the strength, we need the clarity, we need a support network. Once more, Mmusi and DA, thank you very much. God bless all of you. God bless Africa. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And your award. Thank you once again for your courage, Ndate Hichilema. I'm inspired, and I hope everybody else is inspired to do far more than what we are doing. I would now like to invite the Liberal International President, Ms. Annemie Nates, to deliver her speech entitled, "Freedom is the Art of Life." Thank you.
Thank you very much. Ladies and gentlemen, I've always liked to live dangerously, so I accepted Jules' invitation to say a few words, but I didn't know how big the challenge would be, because speaking after all these wonderful contributors we heard this evening is an almost impossible, insurmountable task. So I'll be very brief to say that I feel very humble and at the same time very honored to be able to be here amongst you this evening and to have witnessed and participated in this fantastic celebration. And I have feel a little bit of satisfaction because all through my involvement with Liberal International, me together with Jules, who at the time was Secretary General of Liberal International, we have started in a way to develop the activities in Africa. And the beginnings were, of course, of necessity very modest. And I'm very proud to see and very happy to see how well these activities have developed. And it is a great satisfaction to see that Liberal International is important to you, is of significance, and even more importantly, that there are times, there have been times, and I hope there won't be many times in the future, but there have been times when we have been helpful to you, and that is a great satisfaction because what else are we for? Not just to devise high-minded ideas about liberalism and freedom, but to act and to help people realize their potential by fighting for giving themselves and others the opportunity to develop their capacities and competences to the maximum, because that is what liberalism is all about. And that is also what freedom is all about. Freedom is not just the possibility to do as you please and to act eventually very stupidly if that is in your nature. No, freedom is the possibility to develop your capacities, to develop whatever talents you have, whatever gifts you have. And that brings me to the fact that I would like to tell you that only a few days ago, my husband and I visited in Cape Town this beautiful modern arts museum, the Museum of Contemporary African Art in the silos. And it is absolutely marvelous. It was a great experience. It is architecturally very interesting, but it is also very interesting because it displays in a wonderful way some magnificent realizations of African art. Artists from South Africa, but not only from South Africa, also from Kenya, from Nigeria, from Benin, from the United States. And if you haven't had the opportunity to see it, I would recommend, please go. It's absolutely worth it. And it's a testimonial. The works you see there are testimonials both to the suffering that this continent and its successive generations have endured, but also it's a testimony of the power of and the resilience of African men and African women, because there's some fantastic, beautiful things made by African female artists. And that was also for me a subject of pride and satisfaction to see that such beautiful art made not only by men but also made by African women. So I would like to conclude this very brief intervention by saying that I fully realize that what you have achieved and what you are achieving in your lives and in your countries is so much more difficult than what we are faced with in ours. Most of us are engaged in politics, but there's no comparison. There's no comparison between what we face when we conduct a campaign or try to collect votes and what you have to face whenever you conduct campaigns. And I have had the opportunity to be the leader of election observation missions in Zambia about 10 years ago, and in Tunisia and in other parts of Africa. And then you realize that it's so much more difficult, it's so much harder, even if at the core it's about the same. It's about how do I transmit my message? How do I convey whatever hope I may have for the future? How do I convey the vision I may have for the future to other people so that they vote for me and they vote for my party? Because without votes, there's nothing we can do. But if there's one lesson that we have learned in, let's say, the past 15 years, and some of your, what you said, have proven that as well, is that democracy and freedom, for democracy and freedom, elections are important, but they are certainly not enough. What happens in between elections is incredibly important. And this is something we have in the beginning of the modern day democratic movement, which we have neglected, thinking that we had to concentrate on elections. And you remember we were satisfied when we thought we could say that elections had been free and fair, because that was the way the message was generally worded. But it's only part of political life and about democracy. I strongly believe that it is what happens in between elections is absolutely crucial. And the successes of the DA here in South Africa are an illustration of that. They are an illustration not only of the many talents of so many of you young leaders and elected members of the DA, but also of the work you have been doing for several years. And you have been doing all over the country. And in contact, people-to-people contact, etc., etc. And we have learned valuable lessons from your successes. And this is probably one of the most positive developments of the last few years. There used to be that we thought we could teach you a number of things, and maybe we did, but we have now arrived at a stage where we can learn from you, and where you teach us valuable lessons. And that makes the exchange so much more fruitful and also so much more equal. And that enables us to approach you in a more normal and humble way, because it has now become an exchange. And so I would like to thank you for that, and I would like to congratulate Friedrich Naumann and Jules and his team for this beautiful evening, and I would like to thank all of you, the speakers and the master of ceremony, who did a great job, the Soweto choir, which was fantastic. I won't say that I grew up with Pata Pata, but almost. So it was great to see it performed here. So ladies and gentlemen, allow me to conclude by saying thank you so very much.
Thank you very much, Ms. Animinates. I think on a lighter note, but also very serious note, I want to extend the hand of sisterhood to you. I've had brotherhood being extended, and I think on a lighter note, but without losing the meaning, I want to extend a hand of sisterhood to you. Because I've listened, and we have to be there for each other, even if it's across the oceans. My leader teases me that I'm campaigning, but the reality is we talk about the brotherhood, and there's an African saying here in South Africa that says a woman holds a knife on the sharp edge. And so it is not just the brotherhood. I think brotherhood in the broader context, that it's the humanhood. Thanks to your lessons, Dr. Hichilema. Let me invite the president of the Alliance of Liberals and the Democrats for Europe Party, Mr. Hans van Balen, to do the closing remarks. We've had a fantastic evening, and I would like him to do the closing remarks before a few final announcements. Thank you, Mr. Balen.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Maybe you should also have said, keep it short. I want to say, we liberals are not better than others if you speak about human rights. but we can't look away because there is this personal commitment, this personal responsibility. It's not about what the law says we should do, but what we feel. And we see many examples. If I recall, and for the Dutch, it's a known example, that a very young colonial administrator saw that Indonesian people were used as livestock by the colonial government, but also by the princes, the local princes. And he could only speak out. There was no alternative. He was demoted. He was sent away without pension, without anything. He was made a scapegoat, and he ended in poverty, and his family as well. But he said, I had no other option. I could not look away. If we see those in the Second World War who, with their own lives, protected Jews, Roma, other people, and they knew that they could pay with their own lives, but also of their families, but they couldn't look away. If I see South Africa, Helen Suzman and many others, who saw this inhumane system of apartheid, they couldn't look away. They could live in nice conditions, but they chose to become outcasts because of the fact that they see all citizens of South Africa as equals. And look at those people after the end of apartheid, who didn't want revenge, but they want justice done, reconciliation and truth. Those people, led by Nelson Mandela, were and are heroes. And I think the true heritage of Mandela is protected by the Democratic Alliance and not by ANC. Again, if I look at the Democratic Alliance, I feel at home. And I see so many councillors and members of parliament who do community work, not only the work in the council and in parliament. And we've spoken too much about him, but I've been told about Brakpan, poor whites, poor blacks. And this former councillor and this member of parliament has never looked away. He tries to improve the conditions, although he knows that maybe the people he works for will not vote for DA yet. But he can't look away. And this is also a personal commitment. And then I end. In 1944, my father was in Rotterdam, and in a razzia he was taken away by the Germans to work in Germany, a forced laborer. In the middle of Germany, he left the train. Maybe he was a nerd, he was crazy. He just left the train, crossed over the station, took another train. There was the German police, Ausweisbitte, the paperwork, please. And they said, it's not right. You shouldn't be here. And then a young German officer of maybe 20 years old or younger said, give me the papers. They're right. Papers are right. Leave this man alone. He didn't know this man, my father. And he could have paid with his own life and his family lives. But he wanted to help this young Dutchman. And he said, otherwise, to the police agent, I report you. And my father escaped. We never knew the name of this young German officer, but he kept his dignity in a terrible war machine. And those people are heroes, and therefore we can never look away. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Van Berlin. What a night. It's almost sad that our night has come to conclusion. If I can ask for a round of applause for the wonderful audience that you have been and the wonderful speakers that we have had. I live here knowing a little bit more than what I did when I walked into this room. So thank you. When I started tonight, I asked that we take pictures and we trend hashtag capital LIEC. Please let's continue doing so, because that's part of keeping the conversations alive. It will not only trend here, but if you've got followers elsewhere in the world, people will know what we are doing with African Liberals Network. And it's important that we continue communicating. So to everybody, enjoy your dinner, travel safely, keep standing up for liberalism and the liberal principles, and let's all aspire to be the honey badger. I thank you, and good night, and God bless.